what I want to do is ask our first question of the panel, and that is, what is Web 1.0, 2.0, and 2.5? So, Samy, you want to go ahead and take that question and just kind of
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't go as far as Web 1.0. So why don't you, John, like take this one?
Yeah, sorry. This, the question. I mean, I don't know that I would describe a a Web 2.5. Obviously, there are bridges between present and future in any paradigm shift or what have you. But I would take a crack at defining Web 3 as a concept. I would consider myself more of a Web 3 purist, in the sense that the Silicon Valley angle that's been taken to Web 3 in recent times, I think is doing more harm than good, to the original mission. So Gavin Wood, as was kind of illustrated there at the beginning, Gavin Wood, one of the founders of Ethereum, is the person who actually coined the term. And it wasn't about a technology per se, as it was about a movement. Web 3 is the idea that we can create an internet that decentralizes trust and governance. And it's born from the realization that the platform economy that we all know and we have built businesses in and we're interacting with it now. If we're using Google to do this, we're in the platform economy. That platform economy, while creating an internet economy that has fueled startups and made millionaires, also has a dark side, and that dark side is in the concentration of value and data that we all create as producers and consumers on these systems. And so Web 3 was really just an idea that in order for there to be a freer, more economically balanced internet, the decentralization of trust and governance, which will lead to protocol development in the exchange of data, can be the foundation. And that sort of got co-opted by blockchain platforms. I mean, people have attached Web 3 to NFTs and whatnot, and I think those are kind of early examples of solutions that might exist. But when I think about this in the context of the future of the internet, which the Internet of Things is going to play a big part, I believe that the decentralization of trust and governance is probably the most important dynamic in how we architect applications going forward, at the far edge of the network.
Samy, do you want to talk about the decentralization versus centralization that we're currently on with Web 2.5 to Web 2.0?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think what John described about Web 3 is pretty accurate, because the definitions out there are very kind of like diverse, and I would agree with John that like really Web 3 is about like decentralizing or actually distributing like governments and governance and software, and at the core of it, it's using like technologies or methods like crypto, and like for example, in the context of IoT, if every IoT device has like an identity to it, like a private key and a public key, data from that IoT device can be verified without like a central location saying like, oh, this data came from that device, right?
Right.
Which, I mean, yes, John?
I was just going to say, Samy, just to clarify, when you say crypto, you don't mean currency, you mean cryptography, just to be clear.
Yeah, cryptography. Yes, you're right. Yeah, thank you, John, for catching that. Yes. I mean cryptography. Yeah, not the like, yeah, not the token or
Bitcoin.
the coin. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's also like one of the issues that I think a lot of people confuse about Web3. Like a lot of people think, oh, Web3 is cryptocurrencies and Web3 is blockchain. And those are like cryptocurrency is actually a use case of blockchain, and blockchain is one of the
Yeah.
technologies of Web3. So like you don't have to do crypto currency to do Web3, and you don't have to use blockchain to do Web3. And a simple example of that is the interplanetary file system, which is like a distributed, 100% distributed file system, uh, which is like a Web3 technology, or something that's decentralized, like Store.j. It's not a distributed, but a decentralized storage, which is also a Web3 technology. And going back to your question, Gary, about like the architecture, like this is we're going, right? So we're going from that architecture where like all the clients go to server, or the that client server architecture, to a more like a distributed architecture where if it's decentralized, it's kind of like a good number of copies of that server. Some like if you take like for example Bitcoin, like every node has a copy of the whole blockchain, so it's like it's decentralized, and then they agree on the truth using a consensus mechanism, which is known as mining, and which is very inefficient in the case of Bitcoin. But like there are other mechanisms that are like more efficient, like a proof of stake, for example, which is more efficient than kind of like doing a proof of work. But not everything in Web3 is consensus based. Like if you look at IPFS, if I want to store a file in IPFS, I don't need anybody to agree with me. I just like generate a hash of that file. Just to put it simply, it's a little bit more complex than that. You need to generate actually a tree that represent that file. It's called a DAG or a Merkle tree. But like the hash of that file, you generate it and then you store it, and then you tell the network like, hey, I have that hash, right? Like not everybody needs to agree with you, and that's the like the that's the possibility to do that comes from cryptography, because a hash of anything is supposed to be unique, right? So if you say like, hey, this is my file and I have it like on the network, like it's very unlikely that somebody else will have that. And that same concept is used in in wallets, for example. Like your address is like your wallet is the hash of your public key, which is actually unique, of some sort of hash. Like sometimes it's a double hash. It depends on the blockchain, but that's unique. Like you don't need a central authority or a central server to generate like a an address, right? And kind of like contribute to the network, and that's how we build distributed and decentralized systems, or more like distributed systems. So basically, in a distributed system, I don't need to go to a central authority to say like, hey, I need to write this data, or I need to contribute this data to the network. Like, hey, a server somewhere in AWS, write this IoT data. I can just say like, hey, I gathered all this data this day. I signed this data with my key that you can and you can verify that I signed this data, and the CID of this data is this. And whenever you need it, you can get it from the network, from me or for anybody else that cached that CID or pinned that CID, right? And then that CID could also be referenced into a chain, for example, which is how they like NFTs are used or done today. So the like the image or video or whatever, like 3D file or whatever the NFT is not stored on chain, but rather like generally on IPFS. right? Because it's expensive to store data on a blockchain too. But that CID is unique to that asset. And yeah.
All right,
Go
so
ahead.
Sammy, you've thrown out a lot of terminology so far. I
Okay.
think I need to back up a little bit just to make sure that
Okay.
we're all at level set a little bit from the terminology perspective.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I would wanted to ask is, what are some good examples of Web3? And then I was going to say specifically things like decentralized apps or DApps. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
I think today when you say DApps, most people think smart contracts, but the truth is very little of like a DApp is on chain, and you can read that even on Ethereum website. So and like some of it is actually on chain, like when it comes to ownership or like a financial transaction. Uh, and steps that really need to be on chain, but everything else is not on chain. So storage generally will go to IPFS when possible, or some other sort of distributed storage. And then unfortunately, compute today lives on Web 2 clouds, and this is where that like Web 2.5 terminology comes from my perspective, where like a lot of those the apps out there are using like AWS and Google and Azure, and they end up like really building software that's not really distributed, but only very little of it is. Yeah.
And I think, I think so. So in part, one of the reasons why the cryptocurrency market has kind of co-opted Web3 is because it is, you can point to those kinds of systems as being the early examples of Web3 solutions. But it's unfortunate that that's the case, because like the mainstream consciousness solutions have yet to materialize, but they're coming. And the reason why they're coming, and the reason why everybody is so emboldened by Web3 is because amongst us builders and innovators in this space, we realize and we see that the future of digital society faces a multidimensional challenge, right? In one dimension, we face an existential crisis in the form of freedom of discourse, government censorship, the exploitation of private data by bloated tech companies. And the world's financial systems, generally speaking, are built on legacy database architectures that continue to be ravaged by digital pirates and nefarious actors. I mean, there's disclosures every day about breaches and hack and theft. That's not because cybersecurity is bad. It's because architecture is bad, right? Web 2 architecture, how we centralize data, in traditional systems, is what's broken. That's what ultimately has to change. And the financial systems themselves, we can see this today, from banking to finance to commerce, remain locked in this antiquated oligopoly where government regulation seems to be the only source of innovation, and innovation is limited to inventing new ways to protect and insulate themselves from the possibility of change. And in another dimension, and this will show to this group in your IT focus, software, as you know, is evolving from abstract, static, managed applications in the cloud to a new realm where software is making real-time decisions using things like federated learning models and instantaneous data sharing. And this is where like software platform systems like what Samy is building at Taubyte are going to be key building blocks to the future. Because if we have this vision of interconnecting trillions of sensors and devices to enable an autonomous and intelligent future, we have to realize that's in direct conflict with the current business models.
John, can you repeat the last 10, 15 seconds? You broke up there.
Well, Web3.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I'm not sure where I apologize. No, I'm actually on satellite internet because I'm technically camping in Canada right now. So I'm literally, this is sat internet. So if you if it sucks, write a letter to Elon, will you? So what I was saying is, I don't know how much of that you caught, but what I was saying is that the other dimension to this is that we're approaching a world where software is evolving from abstract, static, managed apps to this new realm where software is going to be making real-time decisions using things like federated learning models and instantaneous data sharing. And this is what I was saying, is that this is where platforms like what Samy's building at Taubyte are going to be instrumental building blocks of this future. Because if we're going to interconnect trillions of sensors and devices and enable this autonomous and intelligent future, we have to do it in a way that is not in direct conflict with the current business models of the legacy centralized platforms. That has to be done in a fully distributed, decentralized manner. Otherwise, we'll end up where we are today, which is these oligopolies that control the data and monetize our information, and do so in ways that are largely insecure because of architecture, right? Because of this centralized architecture. So I think it's important to understand, like, how the importance of Web3, not just in the context of cryptographically signing things and providing data integrity or data attestation. I think that's important, but these concepts are building blocks to a future that will, in my opinion, accelerate IoT, right, at the far edge of the network. It'll accelerate it as we remove this concept of centralization of trust and control.
So we keep hearing all these promises of what Web 3.0 is going to do for us, and specifically increase security, scalability, privacy. Can you touch on those topics just a bit? I know you started, but maybe just kind of elaborate just a little bit more on those three areas.
Yeah, absolutely. So Samy was starting to. Yeah, well, I was just going to say, I'll just tee it off for you, Samy, because I think you were explaining that when you were explaining how cryptography works in this context, right? But like, if you think about it, let's take one example. Okay, this is one solution that I've worked on in the past. Where we're trying to provide I'll call it the integrity or the verification of information, the attestation that something is true, okay? Because that's a big deal, right? If I think about the way that AWS works in a serverless context, if I push a function to AWS Lambda, the minute I push a function to Lambda, it's out of my hands, and nobody can attest to whether or not there was any modification to my code before it was run, before it was executed. Not even AWS will do that, right? So, the verification of integrity of code, or the verification of integrity of any piece of data that exists on the internet, is a really big deal. And one of the principles of Web3 is that using cryptography, we can provide a level of trustlessness where there is no central party that you're having to rely on to verify that in fact the code you wrote was the code that was executed, or the data you wrote is the data in fact that was retrieved, all right, from a network or from a system. So I often refer to it as like the notarization of code and data on the internet. I think is a really big deal in providing attestation, and Web3 as a protocol driven architecture can solve for that.
So I heard you mention one of the hyperscalers, AWS. How is Web 3.0 going to affect that business model?
You mean AWS's business model or hyperscalers in general? Sorry, just clarification.
In general, how's 3.0 going to make a difference? Because we're decentralizing potentially from them, right? So is that the case, or are we going to still all have an account with one of the three, or combination of?
Yeah, Sammy, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, sure. I think I think AWS, Google, and Azure may have a lot of Web 2 legacy and technological debt. It's huge, and it's hard to pivot. But Google is showing the way. So So basically, Google is bringing some stuff to its marketplace. So basically, on Google, you can do you can spin up like a node, like an Ethereum node, or just what you can do on Alchemy, right? Instead of using Alchemy, you can spin that up on GCP. I think they're also working on some tools to explore chains and do some analytics and stuff. So they kind of like competing with some products from Consensus and others, and Alchemy and Fura as well. Like they have some of those products as well. I think they're going to try to adapt, but in all cases, like it's gonna be like a long time. It will take some time to really move from like this centralized architecture that we were using in software, because it's very easy to think centralized to a more like distributed or decentralized architecture. So they're gonna be around, just like mainframe are still around today. It's just like, and they're going to adapt to some extent, and they're going to, I think, from what I believe is, you're not gonna use like AWS, like let's say 5 to 10 years from now directly. You're very likely going to use something else that's using AWS as a bare metal capacity provider, either for storage or for compute, but not using like AWS, like Lambda, right? Going back to what John said, like when you push something to Lambda, you don't know if the code being executed is yours. You don't even know if AWS really executed the code. If they say I executed the code 1,000,000 times, you just have to take their word for it, right? You don't really know. Where if I go back to what I was saying about IPFS, and if I bring a simple example, like sometimes when you go and download something, they give you a link and they give you a checksum, right? So like, hey, when you download this, check the checksum. Well, in IPFS, the checksum is the name of the file, right? So when you get the file, you already know the checksum ahead of time. So when you get the file, you verify it, right? So, and that file could be code as well, right? So when I get the code, I verify it before I execute it. And this is how, like, in Web3, when we run compute, we're sure that code is the code that we pushed, right? Same thing for smart contract. The same concept is used on smart contracts. So at the end of the day,
so by the yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, so just I want to just as a use case for that, folks, so you understand. So like, just when the further we get into the Internet of Things, and the further we get into autonomous and intelligent infrastructure, the bigger and more magnified this problem is going to become. Because the last thing that, say, you want the military to be doing is questioning whether the line of code on the drone could have been modified before the mission. By anybody, a nefarious actor, an accident, what have you, right? The verification of code, it becomes, tantamount in, IoT architecture and IoT systems, which is why I think that the legacy hyperscalers are, this isn't about eroding them, or this isn't about like they're going to go away or the cloud is going to away. I mean, that's 30 years from now, we'll still be talking about cloud systems, to Sammy's point, but the future of the internet is not being built on centralized platform systems. It's being built at the far edge of the network, right? The beachhead in the coming battle is the edge. And in order to architect for the edge, you have to embrace distributed computing. You have to embrace these concepts of decentralized trust and governance in order to scale, which is why, like I said, I mean, not to pump Sammy's tires here too much, but he's got it right. Like he's figured out that you have, in order to build a fully distributed application, you have to build it you have to design it and build it using a platform that decouples or unbundles these things that we have in our mind about how we do things traditionally in the cloud, right? His system doesn't work like that. His system is designed for you to be completely free from that. And once you do break free from that, from a software architecture standpoint, man, the world is your oyster when it comes to being able to build and deploy highly secure, highly scalable code, really at planet scale.
Can I ask questions?
Sorry, Sam,
Go
I
ahead.
didn't mean to interrupt you there.
So can we put this in
Very
a
good.
real world? You talked about, dude, I'm less worried about the military drones and stuff for other reasons, but not that I'm saying it should be concerned. That's not really my question. My question is really, let's take Merrill Lynch or TD Ameritrade. I'm worried about my money. Okay. And so my money's there and it's one of those accounts. Let's say that TD Ameritrade has 100 terabytes of a database, some big ass SQL database that stores everybody's money and what they own and all the transactions and statements and all that stuff. And instead of being centralized in your world, that's all now decentralized. And so there's multiple copies. Correct me if I'm wrong in the end of this, and there are multiple copies somewhere out there. And every time a transaction's made, there's going to be a blockchain or something to go with it. And so some hash, something that goes with it. And so it's going to get bigger and there's going to be multiple copies. So there's the multiple copy nature. And then there's every transaction changes innovation. You don't want to take 100 terabytes and every time you change it, have a, make a copy. It's only going to be on the pieces that changed, I assume.
Oh,
The record, the whatever.
so you're,
So how
yeah.
many exabytes or yottabytes is this
So
going
you're
to
all-
be, and where is it?
It's not about copies of the data, guys. It's really just it's hashes of the information, right? It's infinitesimal in terms of its size, but its importance in terms of being able to secure records, right? To make them, this is when we talk about immutable data, right? If data is immutable, it
When you say
becomes
How big is the hash compared to the record? I mean, a record at TD Ameritrade for a transaction is 1,000 bytes. It's a buy, a sell, how much, and I don't know. It's a K, it's 2K. It's not a megabyte per record. It's a K, and I'm probably being generous. That goes with every record, and we're talking about millions of transactions per day that TD does for their. I'm picking on TD, but for their customer base. I mean, they have a small customer base, only a few million customers probably. So whatever transactions per day.
Yeah, Chris, I think there is little confusion there. So number one, yes, some blockchains. When you talk about blockchain, because you're talking about financial here, some blockchains do have that limitation of having a copy of the data, right? Ethereum and like Bitcoin and others. But some other blockchains are now introducing sharding. So now not like the whole data is not copied all over the place. And then the other thing that you need to think of is when you address data by a hash, because all of a blockchain is actually, well, what we refer to as a chain is actually a block just pointing to transactions, but transactions are stored in what we call the DAG, a direct acyclic graph, or a Merkle tree, right? So because it's a Merkle tree where the addresses are hashes, if blocks are similar, they're not going to be copied. So it's kind of like native deduplication for you right there.
Yeah, correct. That's right.
I get that.
That's where distributed ledger technology is headed in that direction entirely.
Okay, but that is still a lot of data, and if you duplicate, or you have, it becomes more and more distributed. Right now, TD, all their stuff centralized. I mean, they have copies across the globe, but there's a database with everybody's transactions, everybody's records, and if you make a transaction and it's a K, and it's another K, and then I get you're talking about like Bitcoin or something. There's only 3 people on the planet who use Bitcoin by comparison to those who make real transactions on real cash, real stock, real things each and every day. I mean, there's entire exchanges based on that versus Bitcoin is really a small infinitesimal group of people who play in that.
Correct. Right. I mean, there are also like scalability solution to blockchain, like polygons and others that actually aggregates like a lot of transactions and do like rollups, like ZK rollups and stuff like that into the main chain, which basically brings like a lot of transaction into, like, let's say, one block, right? Which also reduces the amount of data in there. So it's kind of like a layered system, and add on top of that the fact that we're also looking at blockchains that are sharding the data. I think it's gonna be like TD could actually run all those transactions on a chain that's scalable. Like let's say they're using sharding and like roll ups and stuff like that, and they're gonna be fine. And also from another point of view, like think of like what we think of as a gig today is nothing, but like 10 years ago it was a lot of data. So I think 10 years from now, like a terabyte would be nothing. Like it won't be enough for like a future Nintendo Switch game probably.
Can I add something? Yeah.
Sure.
So I think from a Web3 standpoint, this is Sean. Going back to your question, I think Web3 is going to challenge all the Web2 business models. So if you look at the decentralized exchange, so in the whole crypto world today, Uniswap is the biggest, P2P, person-to-person decentralized exchange. So all the rules are in the cryptography or in the blockchain,
Okay.
and then basically you don't need TD Ameritrade. Okay, you don't need Merrill Lynch. You don't need any of these intermediaries because the rules are there on the
Yeah.
blockchain, and then everything is decentralized. So, if you talk about decentralized storage, the three companies that are leading that are FileNet, Arweave, and Akash Technologies. So
I
these
think
three.
grassroots, we're going to lose Merrill Lynch the next 50 years or 100 years.
Well, I mean, they might be there, but it's just like how Facebook came along, and AOL and some of these guys,
Merrill
Yahoo,
Lynch was here
etc.
100 years prior. And we'll be
Yeah,
here
they'll be
100 years
around. I'm not denying that.
Yeah.
They'll be around. Okay, but it depends on. But Web3 is to challenge all the Web2 business models slowly. Okay, so if you look at today in the crypto world,
But
it's
you
all
keep saying
decentralized.
crypto, let's back up. The crypto world is a bad example because it's an infinitesimal world. It's tiny. It's not
Today,
Well,
yes.
it is, but it's been for 10 years now. It's been infinitesimal. It really is not a big. I mean, it's not a lot of money in the big picture.
No.
You need it. It's okay as a test platform to go a little beta test on some software and make it work on a little bit of system for Bitcoin.
But
But if you want to test something for the financial, you got to test on Merrill Lynch or some of those, millions of transactions.
Oh, yeah.
Billions of
I
transactions.
mean, today, if you look at Solana blockchain or Ethereum blockchains, right, the transactions, I don't have all the data. I mean, these guys are experts. They would know all the data. But those numbers are even crossing what you have on Visa. Okay. Yeah, they are. Okay. And the number of transactions. Okay. So I think, I mean,
There's
today it's like
320 million Americans,
Facebook,
right?
12
320
years
million
back,
Americans,
12
you
years back, Facebook will be like, oh, you just have something like, a platform where people are sharing pictures and stuff like that. But when you have a network, right? When you look at Metcalfe's law, right? As the network grows, the power of it grows exponentially.
Okay.
So if you look at
How
the
many-
crypto adoption
How many
and the
minutes
internet
Visa transactions
adoption,
a day? How many
no.
made a
So,
business transaction?
and this
We
is
all
like
did.
Ford
How many
saying
minutes-
25 years back, that you see any Japanese car in my parking lot.
How many
No.
made a Bitcoin transaction this month?
I think
You
you're
don't-
going to see
no,
more
see-
AML and KYC regulations and blockchain identity architectures way before they see the financials. That's where it's playing out right now.
And you'll see regulations and all of that slowly catching up. But it's just like, Facebook 15 years back, right? It was like, you bunch of guys, you're just putting some pictures with families and sharing. But once you have that network, if you look at the crypto adoption and the internet adoption from 15 years back, it's following the exact same curve. I'm just sharing some of the business side of it. Yeah.
When you say crypto, is it more just blockchain as opposed
Yes.
to, that's where I'm
yes.
getting kinda
Blockchain. Yeah.
I'm
So it's
tickled with
Bitcoin and all the
I mean,
altcoins and stuff.
Blockchain's great. I understand. I get that. I know the crypto piece of that. And the example, when we talk about crypto, I'd rather just talk about bigger picture things, that bigger databases, bigger volume, bigger data sets. And we talk about, the gentleman said something about, well, next year a terabyte won't be much data. I understand that. And we ran entire financial systems on IBM 360s and everything else a long time ago when a megabyte was the infinite amount of space and all that stuff. But today we consume. We always consume. I mean, we were happy with email when it was all text. Now we can't send a megabyte. We can't send an email to a megabyte. Crap. So we consume what we have. So today's terabyte will be an exabyte next year and an exabyte. That's the way we run data. We're just doing what we have.
It won't be that in the future. All of your pieces of data will be centralized in blockchains. Your name, your address. So all of these companies in the world are not duplicating your data. They're
I'm
going
not
to,
arguing
they're
that.
going to a blockchain
I
to
get
get
that.
that, to synchronize your data. So the duplication of data in the future is actually gonna go down.
No, I get the idea of duplication, meaning that you won't have my same name, address, phone number in every institution, every McDonald's gift card and all that crap. I get that. But that's not my real quantity of data. I mean, if I take an email,
You got an image, you got
an email, an image, whatever.
biometrics, you know, you got
you change it.
massive amount of data. But the thing is it's centralized and massive and duplicated.
You look at helium, right, in IoT,
Yeah.
how they are using distributed, Wi-Fi power helium, which is, fairly well known.
Which is
I'm
failing.
sure Sammy would can talk
I
about
think,
it.
yeah. I think there are a couple, and maybe this is kind of like also an opportunity to clarify that as well. Like I said, I mean, at the beginning, like number one, blockchain is a technology of Web3. Like you were mentioning, like IPFS and all, like R-Wave, like IPFS and R-Wave. Well, R-Wave does have like a blockchain side for you to pay for the usage, but the way they store your data and serve your website it's not on chain, right? Because it's very expensive to store on chain because you're replicating the data and you have to have consensus to store everything and stuff like that. So, and when you look at IPFS, like I was mentioning before, IPFS is not a blockchain, right? It has components that a blockchain would have, like the DAG or the Merkle tree. Like you will find that on any blockchain, right? But IPFS doesn't have a chain that has this kind of like a chain of blocks of transactions that the network agreed upon using a consensus mechanism, right? Which is like either like for example like a proof of work or proof of stake or a mix of that or something else, but doesn't need any of that, right? That's from one side, and then the other side is to your point, like yes, peer-to-peer technologies and Web3 technologies, whether it's blockchain or other steps like IPFS or WebAssembly or steps like that are like Web3 technologies. They are early, and we do have problems with scaling, and we do have problems with a lot of stuff. But like as we did with Web2, like go back to the early days of Facebook, right? And like those big companies. So as we go, we're going to find ways to make like a blockchain run like more transactions than what a regular bank can do today or Visa can do today. And then we're going to find ways to make peer-to-peer protocols way more efficient than a straight TCP/IP as well.
Okay, Sammy, I think what I want to do here is take this up about 10,000 feet and kind of touch on something that we started to discuss earlier. And I'll ask this kind of in a question. We mentioned Elon Musk, and we realized that he's one of the few guys that are out there who is adopting this technology. My question at this point is, who are the early adopters right now? From the business perspective for Web 3.0. John, you want to address that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's early adopters, I guess, in different segments and sectors of the market, right? So, I mean, I could point to any one of Sammy's customers as early adopters of Web 3.0 principles. But if you wanted to look, at mainstream businesses like banking, I would point to the pioneering work that Signature Bank New York has embraced. So Signature is one of the very few mainstream commercial banks in the United States to offer a full end-to-end synthetic stablecoin for their customers. Like they are tokenizing transactions and decentralizing trust on their own, in ways that, that quite frankly would make other banks in the United States kind of blush. So I think they're a really great example. in sort of mainstream banking, where this has been adopted and where this is being, really pioneered and led. But Sammy, you might be able to talk about some of your customers and your use cases, because I think anytime you embrace a platform like what you're building, you're automatically, an early adopter of these principles.
Yeah. I think there is. It's not like there is a lack of adopters of Web3. I think there is a divide between two words, like the word of like companies and groups of people, communities or DAOs and companies that are kind of like on Web3 and building on Web3 and looking for Web3 solutions, like what we're doing at Taubyte, or solutions like IPFS, and looking at chains and say like, hey, we're not happy with Ethereum. Is there another solution? Let's use like Solana or something like something else, right? And there are like the kind of like Web2 people that kind of like are kind of like left behind to some extent, and there is this divide, and there is this kind of like how do we like make that work together? I think different companies, even like like traditional companies, are finding their way into Web3, like from having like a metaverse presence to having an NFT collection, and those are just beginnings, right? Because we need to start with something, and those are obvious use cases that people are working on, right? So they have metaverse presence, like NFT. They're moving their rewards into tokens, and like steps like that are doing and kind of like moving to Web3 progressively. But as we go, I think the most important use case that will matter here in this group, and will be the biggest use case, is what John pointed to, is really the edge and IoT, because we cannot like manage that centrally, like having like this traditional control plane, and we cannot scale IoT vertically, so it has to scale like horizontally. And I think the best way of doing that is leveraging Web3 technologies.
So Sammy, you talked a little bit about adoption. What is, in your perspective, the adoption rate? And at what point do you think that adoption rate will, let's just say, supersede Web 2.0?
I think we do have a huge lack of adoption today in Web3. So there is about like 18,000, 30,000 ish like active Web3 developers today, and it makes sense. Like building on Web3 is complex. The tools are still like not there yet, and a lot of stuff need to be built and scaled and made better, right? So we're not there yet, like versus like 26 million Web2 developers, but the internet is moving there. So we'll have to go there. We'll have to enable those builders. And this is kind of like our mission at Taubyte, is kind of like enabling those builders, enabling the Web3 builders to build better, and then helping the Web2 builders to become Web3 builders, because we're presenting them with familiar tools and interfaces, right? I think like from numbers that were published by like Electric Capital and A16Z and others, like the like getting like to a billion user is about like 2031, right? And this is where like it's gonna be like, oh, we have enough users on Web3 that Web2 is kind of like a minority of users out there. So it's probably not going away. It's probably still be there. Like, I'm always amazed at the fact that most of the steps in the most advanced country in the world, which is the US, needs to be done over the phone, right? So we'll still have Web 2 stuff probably by 2031, and we'll probably still have gas cars as well. But, probably get to the point where, most of the applications out there will be Web3 native.
All right, so as we start closing down here, I just thought I'd ask kind of a general question here. How is the decentralized web going to affect future business transactions? That's out of both of you.
John?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think, it's, what you're going to see is peer-to-peer, right? So the way this is going to affect business transactions the most over the next decade is the removal of intermediaries, right? This notion of peer-to-peer commerce, which, I believe philosophically is a building block to, the eventuality of machine-to-machine commerce. The elimination of the intermediary is going to be the biggest shift in business transactions, generally speaking, in the next decade.
Can I just add one more thing? So I think it is peer-to-peer and removal of the intermediaries, but also all the peers benefit because of the tokenization and the growth of the network. So instead of AWS or Facebook, which is the intermediary or the centralized player, and they get all the benefits in this new decentralized system, and when you add tokenization, you remove the intermediary, it's peer-to-peer, the rules are all on the blockchain, cryptography, but then all the peers, the community benefits the upside. So as the network grows, so essentially, I mean, I've heard some of the folks, when they talk about Web3, they do put a lot of emphasis on the tokenization aspect, because once you have tokenized, you have sort of abstracted the value of the community, and that's like the Web3 layer on top of the Web2. So essentially, you remove the intermediary, it's P2P, all the rules are in the blockchain, but then all the peers who are part of the network, they benefit instead of the centralized AWS or Facebook or some of these guys. So what you'll find is, the Merrill Lynch of the world, they'll still be around, okay? But then, if you start looking at a lot of the decentralized everything, I know companies that are coming up with decentralized Uber, right? So instead of Uber trying to give that app, you have the rules and you have the app and it's all decentralized, but it's all tokenized. It's a combination of removal of the intermediary. You have the trust built through the blockchain. The DAO, decentralized autonomous organizations, without having any company, that's still up in the air. That people are trying to figure out what's the right model for DAO. But definitely the intermediary is a big piece that goes out with the peer-to-peer, and the community, because of the tokenization, they all benefit.
So let's get rid of crime here, because crime, if you can do peer-to-peer, you can do truck transactions, white collar crime, you do whatever. I mean, part of the reason we have these intermediaries, even the financial world, is to prevent the crime. I can't transfer money now from the Caymans or here or there to the bank most of the time without it's a different name on the account. I can't even invest in startups sometimes without getting it done because I'm investing in other thing. I got a proof to show and whatever. So we have this crime aspect that gets in the middle of these potential transactions.
And that's why SEC and CFTC, all these guys are there trying to figure it out. And you will see all the regulations over the next 10 to 12 months. It all just happened so fast. It's like, the rule of jungle.
Who do we call if something goes wrong? Like, one of the beauties about buying from Amazon, we all do, why Amazon's done so well in many ways, is that if something goes wrong, I send it back. I know that if I buy a product, I can buy it on eBay cheaper. I can buy it from ABC company cheaper. I'm going online and look for like a marine part. Boy, it could be anywhere in the world. And I can buy it from ABC Marine in Doofus, New York. And it's like, why do I not buy it there? It was $5 cheaper. Because if I buy it from Amazon and something goes wrong, I return it.
But what if you are Amazon? What if you are Amazon? If you are getting the benefit, so that's what I'm saying. With tokenization, all the peers, you are part of the community and you get the upside. So if you look at Helium, which is providing
a failing thing, go to another subject.
Which one?
Helium.
No, I think I'm sorry, but I think, Chris, kind of like it has a point, right? Because when you go to like if one of the problems is in blockchain is transactions are final. So really, if you buy something with a crypto, like it's pretty hard to get your crypto back right now. So a lot of questions that we're talking about today, we don't have the answer to, and I don't think current DAOs like solve a lot of the issues that are about businesses and companies today, because most DAOs are controlled by VCs and
Yes.
controlled by 1% of the token owners as well. So I think there's a lot of stuff that we need to figure out, and things are going to change and evolve, like just like like taking like a a Darwinian path, and then like 10 years from now we'll really see like what Web3 is really about, and we'll have like a concise definition of it probably.
Yeah,
There's a
you're
lot of
talking.
stuff
Yeah,
that-
you're also you're talking about hard goods marketplaces, which is, I mean, in the future of the internet, I think that's a corner case. The lion's share of the economic value in the future of the internet, in the Internet of Things, is data. The exchange and interchange of data. It'll be 100 times retail commerce at scale, because we're talking about machines transacting with machines in this era, right? And so the last thing I want is an intermediary in that market. I want to be able to monetize directly as either a producer or a consumer. And I'll leave you with one comment about the SEC and other regulators. Okay, so I firmly believe that regulation is important and necessary to prevent crime, and I believe that the Web3 community is going to solve for things like KYC and AML in ways that are innovative and compliant. But I wouldn't always look to the established regime that's in charge of regulation, because oftentimes those entities are controlled by the same entities that are trying to prevent being swept aside or left behind because of technological change. But with that said, like I said, KYC, AML, compliance is super important to make sure that you're not transacting on some kid's laptop in North Korea. That no one wants to do that. No one's advocating that. And the market is still sorting itself out. It's still evolving, but it will achieve a center of gravity with regulation and enter the sort of the mainstream ethos in internet commerce.
Short trivia question for the two of you. Two numbers. Number of transactions by credit cards done today, and today, how many transactions were done in crypto today? Bitcoin in particular.
That's Google.
I mean, it's
Go Google.
it's not so it would be like so what you're asking is like comparing the
Number.
size of a
Yes.
planet to the size of a pea. Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know.
Over 1 billion versus 277,000. So
Sure.
Visa.
Yeah, I believe that.
Okay.
So we're
So to be clear, I'm not advocating for cryptocurrencies. So I'm with you.
Well, I just meant in terms of we were
I'm
giving that as an example. I said it was an infinitesimal thing in terms of the size of that market. So
It
let's
is.
talk about it's okay to experiment with technologies with small data. Let's go pick a bigger data set,
Yep.
a Walmart database, something more big store, or it could be AutoZone. I mean, how are they going to transact
So-
that much data?
Just to share, Solana, which is just one of the platforms, 630,000 transactions in the last 7 days.
Okay.
Okay. And Ethereum, 500,000. So I don't know if you add
Yeah.
all of these, it will be like 4 million transactions in the last 7 days.
And how many times have we made a credit? My point of all this is use logic.
You asked,
How many
I
of us
asked
have made a
Google.
credit card transaction
Okay.
this week? We've all made a
So
credit
it's like
transaction.
4 million transactions in
Yeah.
7 days.
And that's every day. We all make transactions with credit cards. And only a few of us have ever made a Bitcoin transaction. A few of us have made one.
These are not Bitcoin, by the way.
But I'm just saying, whatever, Ethereum, any of the cryptos, any of those, it's a very small amount. We make a credit card transaction every day. Everyone here makes a credit card transaction every day. Buy lunch, buy dinner, we do this, we have electric bill, we pay this, pay that, pay something.
it's now buying gas.
Huh?
It's now buying gas.
It hasn't
Yeah.
reached
And
noon
today,
yet.
gas, you might have to go
But
4
there
times.
is somebody
Four
who
credit
said
cards.
there's 4 million transactions
if I
in 7
can-
days.
Yeah.
We don't know
If I
who it
can
is.
add something here, I think one of the goals today, at least for me, was to kind of like separate Web3 from crypto, because like I said, cryptocurrencies is a use case of Web3, not Web3. And then the other thing that you have to think about as well is a lot of people think like Ethereum or Bitcoin or any public blockchain out there provides you with privacy. But the truth is, every transaction is public, and you can scan all the transactions. And obviously, like compared to your credit card transactions, which are private, any transaction you do on a public blockchain is 100% public, and anybody can trace it back to the wallet owner and maybe even to you. So
Well, in the 3 minutes I was gone to get a beer, did we talk about Web 3.0 and transactions and business use cases that weren't blockchain? He said he wanted to, the goal was to separate the two,
No, we
but I've
didn't.
not heard one without saying the other.
No,
And you've been trying desperately for half an hour to try to get them to get there. So
Yeah, I keep want to talk about Walmart and not Bitcoin, because Bitcoin and crypto is such a small market. Let's talk about the big thing. How's this going to work?
Okay, so
Take a TD Ameritrade.
sure. So
Everybody knows-
Walmart's a great example, guys. Yes, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of how companies like Walmart and major retail and major manufacturers are embracing Web3. Okay, so they're moving to an entirely decentralized supply chain management. So asset tracking, asset integrity, asset provenance, all of that is moving to Web3 architectures, and all of it by the big three, retail distributors and manufacturers. We're working on projects now, around the attestation of data and the traceability of information from the minute a seed is planted in the ground to the minute the vegetable lands on your plate. So all of that is being completely decentralized. That is one of the biggest current Web3 use cases in industry today, is supply chain reconstitution.
So that kind of ties right into my last question, and that is, how do you get started with Web 3.0? John?
Well, I mean, I think, the way I would get started in Web3, because Web3 is, protocols versus platforms, and it's an architectural conversation. I would get started in Web3 by examining, application architecture, either for something that you might be building now or considering building now, or in the planning stages, or are in the early stages of either refactoring or redeveloping or upgrading. Those windows of opportunity are great for IT practitioners to trial different and more innovative architectures, and Web3 is that. Web3 is a different architecture for things. Obviously, the meetups like this are fantastic because you get to share ideas and you get to debate points, and you get to, you kind of get to make the topic kind of front and center. But I always rely on peers. I mean, I'm very, very far from the smartest guy in any room, I can tell you that. And so I rely on other smart people that, that are either, have done what I'm attempting to do with success or failure. Oftentimes failure is more valuable than success, because I'm trying to avoid, things that I don't, I want to avoid mistakes if I can. But yeah, so communication and discussion and outreach is really important. But I would consider the first step, reviewing a potential architecture that is, Web3 centric for a project that you're considering.
Sammy, you want to add to that?
no, I think what John mentioned is pretty good, and I think the other side of it where I can add something is from a kind of like, okay, now we know how to approach it. How do we build it? And the truth today is it is hard to figure your way around it, but there are like good starting guides, and I think again, I mean, you can start with trying to play with IPFS, to trying to deploy like a smart contract on a test net. Any of those is valid, but I think blockchain today and Web3 in general is a little bit complicated for any developer, and the best way for them to learn is to try stuff and play with them. So from the high level, I think John covered it. From a developer perspective, I think developers need to play with stuff. It doesn't matter like what technology they start with. Unfortunately, from like a storage perspective, there isn't much options, but from a chain perspective, there is a lot of chains they can try.
So we've been asking all the questions here. Do you feel like there's any areas that we didn't touch on this evening that you want to make a quick comment before we wrap this up?
SSI, self-sovereign identity, Web3, it's a huge part of Web3.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably spend the rest of the night kind of digging into other topics, but one area that I think requires maybe even a special deep dive is the application of Web3 architectures acutely to IoT projects, IoT initiatives explicitly. I mean, we could peel back the onion and really go into that, given more time and more beer in your case, guys. But I think that one definitely probably warrants even a follow up or a separate deep dive.
Yeah, generally, John, those are done during like the IoT breakfast when people are more sober.
Yeah. So John, what is your alternative for internet to Elon? If you didn't have Elon, what would you have for internet today there?
I would probably be having to drive into Civilization to find a Starbucks or something. But it's the best I've got right now. It's not,
the connection has been surprisingly good.
It's not the best. Yeah,
we have an employee on the
sort
Columbia
of,
River. We're glad Elon has that set.
Yeah, well, no doubt. Like, I mean, where I am, I'm in like northern Quebec, and there's like, there's no cable, there's no fiber, there's not even copper. I mean, I couldn't do even regular terrestrial internet. So, satellites is kind of rescued, like highly, very rural places like this. And it's, like there's, streaming gets a little dicey, doing video calls like this can be dicey. If, the rain fade is a little bit of an issue. If I get heavy rain out here, it's like, I'm not going to be planning any like large group. I don't know exactly what, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what my latitude is. I'd have to actually check that. But I'm pretty far north. I'm probably, you could probably draw like, you could draw a straight line west to Hudson Bay.
Hudson Bay, that's pretty good distance up there.
Yeah, we're up. No, let's put it this way: the mosquitoes here are the size of hummingbirds.
All right. Well, thank you guys. We really appreciate your input. I think we've had a lot of questions, and I think we could probably go all night, as you said, on this particular topic, just because it's new and it's the next thing. So I'd love to do that. But what I do want to do is just conclude the formal side of this meeting.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Yeah.
Doors open.